Hello, friends. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. Before I introduce this week's guest, as with every week, we have to go over a few things. First, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the show. It really helps boost the show, grow the audience, and ultimately helps me grow the podcast and allows me to reach out and interview the best guests for you guys. Go follow me, please, on social media as well. On Instagram and Twitter are the two places where I am most active on. On Twitter, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which gives you access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about the guest and future of the show. And most importantly, just an easy way to get the podcast week in and week out into your inbox. One more thing, please consider supporting this independent podcast. I made the decision for now not to work with any sponsors. It's not something I'm a fan of, so I want to keep this podcast independent, and I can only do that with the help of you guys. So please consider supporting the podcast. And finally, if you want to start your own podcast, I have a full tutorial out on Gumroad. It covers everything you need to know, soup to nuts, A to Z, why you should start a podcast, the marketing, the growing, reaching out to guests. Just literally everything that you need to know about starting a podcast is in this ebook. So if you're interested, there is a link in the show notes. Feel free to check that out. And let's move on to the guest. This week I have Gigi Levy Weiss. Gigi is a prolific technology investor in Israel. He is a managing partner at NFX, which is one of the most well-known and successful VC firms in the world. And he was kind enough to lend us or give us about 90 minutes of his time. He's a very busy person, but he was super open and honest and insightful. And I love this episode. It was a lot of fun. We talked about what he as an investor looks for in a team when he invests. We talked about some of his prior investments, actually his first personal investment. We talked about network effects and why they think that is so important. We talked about why Israel is such a tech hub, and we covered the downfall may be a little bit of an extreme word, but why Clubhouse has kind of disappeared, you could say. We also discussed Web3 and its applications and why he is so bullish on Web3, crypto, blockchain. And yeah, you should stick to the end to hear that part. All right, I don't want to keep you guys waiting any longer. This is a great episode, jam-packed with information, plenty of nuggets of wisdom scattered throughout this episode. So let's dive right in. Without further ado, here is this week's guest, Gigi Levy Weiss. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Gigi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
So for people who may not know you, I'll give like a brief, and then you can obviously fill them in. But you are, I've heard you at least referred to as one of Israel's most prolific tech investors. And that's a big compliment, first of all. But secondly, what is your track record for people who may not know who you are?
Track record. I started, so I did the full cycle of tech. I started as a founder, and I founded over the years 7 companies. Most famous one is probably Playtika, which ended up being kind of $10 billion company plus. Although we sold it a lot earlier than that, we didn't get, I, as one of the founders, didn't get to the 10 billion mark. But 7 companies in various fields. Then I became, for a certain period of time, an executive and ran a bunch of Israel's tech companies. The most famous one in that, I ran a division in a company called Amdocs, which is a bidding and CRM company, but I also ran another company called 888, which is an online gaming company. Ran that for a few years. Then I became an angel, so a private investor. Basically did that at the beginning as a hobby alongside having a day job, and then a bit more, like a bit more investments. And over the years, invested in more than 100 companies as a private individual. And then around 5 years ago, I finished my journey to the dark side, as some would say, and I set up a VC. And I set it up with 2 good friends in Silicon Valley. And now we're the 3rd fund, 5 partners. I'm sure we'll touch base on that. And that fund is called NFX, and I'm one of the general partners of that fund. So that's that. I have 3 kids. I live in Israel, and then on top of all the high tech startup stuff, I sit on the board of this large company called Bertelsmann, which is the largest media company in the world, German company. Mm-hmm. And that gives you a perspective of what's happening in the corporate world, which is interesting. And I also am quite involved in a bunch of non-for-profit activities in Israel, mostly around trying to close gaps in society through education. This is one of my passion areas, and trying basically to use both tech education, which has been so material for me and for other people in the Israeli ecosystem, but also trying to use startup methodology to basically take underserved populations and help them change their position in the country using education. We're doing this with Palestinians. We're doing this with ultra-Orthodox kids. We're doing this with Bedouin. We can talk about that later.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I think all of it generally is around what I would call the innovation and the entrepreneurship ecosystem, which is what I'm passionate about.
Have you found a rip or a riff or a loophole in the space-time continuum? Because it seems like you do a lot, and from what I know, there's still only 24 hours for all of us. How do you fit so much in? And this is true I've seen this with a lot of, I don't know if you watch Shark Tank, but that's like my only vice as far as like a reality show type thing.
That's a big vice, man.
I don't know, man. I love it. It's a great show. I love seeing people that like struggle and finally are able to kind of get that W. But I just take Mark Cuban, and I actually had a few people that he's invested in on the podcast, and they do say like, "Hey, man, like when I reach out to Mark, he answers the phone. He answers the text." But he runs an NBA team. He's invested in hundreds of companies. He's got a family. He has to take vacations. Like he's doing a lot of things. How does he fit? And how do you fit like all these different things that he has to do into 24 hours?
Yeah. So first of all, clearly, some things sadly have to give, right? So yeah. I don't think I sport, but I don't sport as much as I would want to. I try to read books, but I don't read as many books as I would like to. I see my friends clearly, but I don't see my friends as much as probably I would like to in my advanced age. And so clearly there is a price to everything. The way I try to work around it is that I'm kind of defining what are my goals and everything. I mean, not in a very robotic way, but I'm kind of defining, what's the minimum or what's the above minimum threshold that I've got to spend time with my kids and with the family and with my parents and with everybody else. And, what do I want to achieve in terms of personal development? And then basically everything else, after I put these big stones into the tank, everything else is just filled with work.
Yeah.
And the reality, of course, is that work is really is infinite. That's the sad reality of it. I mean, I am constantly getting more emails. I'm constantly getting more people that want us to invest in them. It's growing exponentially, not just because we're becoming NFX is becoming more of a known brand to everybody. So everybody's getting, it used to be my brand, and then it became an NFX brand on top. And so that's growing. So I'm getting more and more and more approaches. But I think more than that, the world is shifting. So right now, if in the past, 1 out of 50 kids wanted to be an entrepreneur. And then a few years ago, it probably became 1 out of every 10 kids want to be an entrepreneur. And now it's probably 1 out of every 3 or 4 kids.
Yeah.
And so just in the sheer number of people that are trying to get into this very tight funnel of, hey, I have an idea, I want to be an entrepreneur, all the way till I got funded and I have a unicorn and I'm a billionaire and whatever. The funnel is just growing and becoming tighter and tighter. And so just by design, we are getting a lot more work than we ever did in the past. And so, I have this thing where I remember being a founder and I remember having people not reply. And I remember the horrible feeling of sending an email to somebody, just not getting a reply. Now, in the past, I don't know if you remember it, but you could put a small Java code into your email so that you could see when people open it. And so basically you would know that people open it and then still they didn't reply. And I was like sitting there and saying, all you need to do is write back and say, no, thanks. You know what? Yeah. If you don't want to be polite, just write no. If you want to be nasty, just write no, never write me again. if you want to be super nasty, say you suck, but I just reply with something, and people just didn't reply. And so as a founder, I decided many years ago that I'm always going to reply, always going to reply. And so I have this obsession to answer all emails because I remember that there's a human on the other side, which is tough to remember because these emails come in hundreds, and so.
So you're an inbox zero type guy.
I am. How should I put it? If I want to be frank, I'm an aspirational inbox zero guy.
Okay, I get it.
But I would, the way I look at it is that I would always insist that there would never be an email stuck in my inbox that slows other people around. So if one of my companies writing me or calling me or WhatsApping me or you're texting me, I would always try to get that off the table the fastest because there are other people at the end of it that are waiting for approval for something or for advice on something. And if I don't answer, then they're stuck in their work, and that's just stupid. So these I would try to do then, and clearly the same thing with my partners and with the team that works in NFX. But then you get like literally hundreds every week of founders that are writing. And, I think that there is this interesting phenomenon right now where some of the good guys in the industry, not the bad guys, some of the good guys in the industry declared email bankruptcy. And email bankruptcy basically says, you put an auto reply and you say, guys, I'm sorry, guys or girls, I'm sorry, I'm getting too many emails and I just can't answer. And so if I didn't answer, don't be insulted. It's not personal, but I can't handle it. And, we're talking about top people in the ecosystem that are people that I really appreciate. I'm not there yet, but it's a tempting thought.
I mean, I would assume so. And to add on to what you were saying, how like more kids want to be entrepreneurs nowadays, it's also much more immediate, right? Where before, maybe if you were to have a meeting, it's like, okay, let's meet in New York in 2 weeks. Now it's like, let's hop on a Zoom today or tomorrow or whatever. And then the Zoom calls. And then on top of that, it's like everyone's got the little kind of like media company, right? So I have a podcast, right? And you have a YouTube channel and the other person has a blog. Everyone wants a piece of your time, which that's fine. But just like, how do you have like some sort of a hack, or do you put in like some sort of management system in place where like, okay, this week I'm going to, 20% of my time is going to go to this. I'm going to allocate another 50% of my time to this, et cetera, et cetera.
So I think that first of all, you're totally right that not only more people want to become entrepreneurs, but the immediateness of things is making everything tougher. So the immediateness comes from the ability to hop on a Zoom, but also the immediateness comes from the best teams being funded in lightning speed. Now, I don't know how the world's going to behave in a year from now, if there's going to be some financial slowdown or something, but for now, the best teams no longer take 2 months to close. The best teams take, 3 days to close. And so if you're slow, you're dead. And, which is great, by the way, because I think it keeps the industry honest. I also think that the industry used to be slow and used to use the slowness to basically de-risk investments a lot. And so, at the price of founders, because that slowed down founders. And now everything's much faster. So I think that is great. And we always think of what's good for the entrepreneurs. And then the outcome of all of it is that you really need to move super, super fast. Now, we, for example, in the fund, we have this unique system where, unlike other funds, we don't like the partner meeting thing. The partner meeting thing is where, after a few meetings, you invite the founder to pitch the entire partnership. So, the entire partnership can be 10 people, and these 10 people are, they're now all emailing at the time you're speaking, or they're busy with their things, and they're not really attentive. And because one person is asking questions, the rest of them are just busy with other things. Yeah. And we felt as founders that this process is not the most efficient process that you can have. And so we basically invented a different process. And our different process is that we have at least 3 partners meet the founder, but one-on-one. Okay. And so you basically get our full attention one-on-one from at least 3 partners so that we can dive down into your business and understand. And each one of the partners would go ahead and ask and read all the summaries of before joining. So you don't need to repeat everything. I read everything. What I want to focus on is the competitive landscape. What I want to focus on is this and that. And what that allows us is not just to give the attention, but also, I think, to serve the founders better and to serve ourselves better. The downside of it, of course, is that by design, it means that if my partner sees a great company today, and we want to close everything, at least the longest in a week, it means that I need to meet that company today or tomorrow. And it means that I need to have kind of empty slots, which I don't have. And so that ends up with long nights, and that ends up with, with processes that are super fast. And we pride ourselves that most of our deals are kind of, money in the bank in a week or a week and a half from the time we met the founder, which is, that's what where we're trying to be. But it also comes at the expense of having to spend more time on it. And so I don't really have a hack. My hack is called Efrat, which is my PA for the last, it's got to be now 15 years or 16 years.
Okay.
And she's amazing. And she is basically protecting my time and trying to make sure that I stay sane and stay alive. And she has responsibility from like, say, 8 a.m. till, 7 p.m. and a few of the evenings. And then my wife has responsibility from 7:05 till the next morning. And there's like 5 minutes a day that I can do whatever I want. But generally speaking, if Frat's kind of, helping that. And I have to say that we've looked, it's an interesting one because we've looked at all tools. We've looked at all tricks. We've done all the courses of efficiency and analysis of what you can do. We've offloaded whatever we can offload. And we're just getting to the point that even after everything and all the tools that we're using, it's just too much. And it's just more than a person can handle. And this is the biggest ongoing struggle. Now, I think that what people sometimes misunderstand is that, there are VCs that are nasty, that are not nice.
Yeah.
But I think that many VCs, when I don't answer somebody for 3 or 4 days, the real reason is because I just can't get to it. Yeah. Now, in my inbox now, I have 3 companies that are fundraising from my portfolio that need my help. Now, each time that I need to help a company fundraising, that's probably an hour and a half of work, right? I need to sit down, I need to look at all the VCs, I need to understand who I should send it to, I need to prepare the emails, I need to send them, I need to follow up on them, and so on. And so what we're trying to do is that we're a very tech-driven fund. So we have 15 product and tech people in the fund that are building our own systems. And what the benefit of doing this is that we can basically every time take advantage of that. And whenever we identify something that we can hack through technology, we would put the team to work on that. So for example, on hacking the fundraising thing through technology, we have now a feature that is called Super Fundraiser, where you come into our own built CRM system and you say, okay, company access fundraising. What it would do is that it would then tell you, okay, upload the latest deck, upload the latest blurb, define the stage and the field. It would then connect us to the database of something called Signal, which is an external system that we built for the ecosystem, which basically shows us all the relevant investors. We then mark who are the partners I want to talk to. And then what happens is that the system would start a wizard that would say, "Dear Adam," and then it would put in a few sentences, the blurb, and the deck, and I would just add a nice sentence. "Hey, my friend, what's up?" Da 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 da, and then I click send. It'll send it, and then it will follow up and see because it's connected to my email who replied and who not. So this thing saves me half the time of doing these fundraising things, and like that. We have probably 30 or 40 features that we developed over the years. Each one of them saves me, everything from a few minutes a day to half an hour a day. And so our internal tech system does that. And that's why we're investing in it so much. But other than that, sadly, if I had a hack to tell everybody, I would. Sadly, I don't really have one.
Yeah, there's only, there's a finite capacity, there's a finite time, there's a finite attention span that we can give to things. And I can only imagine, getting hundreds of emails and being bombarded. It's just, it's on the verge of not doable. Do you think there's a, you were talking about how more kids want to be entrepreneurs. And I wonder why that is. Do you think maybe there's a romanticization or an idealism that is maybe portrayed a lot by the media of these tech founders that, they do exits and make billions of dollars, and maybe they don't show the full scope of what it's like being an entrepreneur, the self-doubt, the rejection, the sleepless nights, all that stuff. And they're like, oh, this is great. Look at that guy. He just he just made, $1 billion on some exit. I want to do that as well. And maybe they don't see, like you said, because you're working nonstop. They just don't see that part maybe as much.
Well, are you suggesting that not every startup succeeds?
No, God forbid.
Yeah, as an investor, I can't remember that. I think that definitely there's that side. And I think that definitely the way this industry is portrayed by the media plays a big part in people, looking at it in a more romantical way than they should.
Yeah.
That's for sure. However, I think that there's also the reality, which is that at the end of the day, if we think of our world today, and if we think about kind of social mobility, the reality is that most of the ways that gave you social mobility in the past are no longer functioning.
Yeah.
So when you think about, I don't know, my parents, if you went to work for a bank and you spend your time 25 years working in the bank, there is a high likelihood that at the end of it, you would be, you'd be financially safe, you'd be pretty well respected, and you basically shifted your trajectory from route A to route B and improved and changed created social mobility. Today, the vast majority of these jobs, going to work for Verizon, going to work for a bank, they don't do that anymore. It's because of the demise of the middle class. I mean, a lot have been written on it. I don't think we need to dive into that. But it's also because by design, these companies are sort of struggling themselves, right? These companies are they're no longer the biggest drivers of what's changing in the world. And so if somebody asked me today, what do I want? What should I do if I want zero risk? Then maybe the answer is still go to university and go and work in a bank. Maybe that's still a good thing. But if somebody tells me, look, I'm 22 now and I want a chance at social mobility, then my answer would be, with zero hesitation, you've got to work in tech. Yeah. Now, do you need to be a technological expert? Do you need to write code? No, you don't. You could also be a salesperson. You could also be a customer success person. Start there. You could be a marketing person. You could be a bunch of things. But it is just, the reality is that almost every job that you will take in tech, is far better than its equivalent in non-tech companies, in salary, in promotion chances and everything. And it's just a lot more likely to change your trajectory. And so given that that's the case, and that at the pinnacle of this is entrepreneurship, right? I don't work in tech. I started a company in tech. Then I think that by design, if we think about people's dreams, just like some kids could think, I'm playing soccer, and if I'll play soccer really, really well, I'm going to become Messi, and then I'm going to become famous, and I'm going to get the money. The entrepreneurship dream, in a way, is a lot like that. Only the difference is that while there's one Messi and one Ronaldo in the world, they're basically literally now, especially in today's world, there's like 2,000 unicorns around the world. Yeah. And so there's 2,000 people, 2,000 companies times out of 2 or 3 people that became the Messis in terms of the success of their world. And there's no other field in the world where there can be 5,000 Messis. And the reason is because, in tech is so big and it impacts so part of our lives that you can actually be a Messi in fintech for this country, for this niche, where to be a Messi in soccer, you just need to be the best in soccer. And so, and I think about it, it's true. If you worked in Goldman Sachs all your life and you became the CEO of Goldman Sachs, that also worked, but there's one of those. And so at the end of the day, I think that both ethos-wise and the way the media describes it, but also sort of factually, this is the place where the most human change is created right now at any given time compared to anything else, which leads today to the fact that tech is the place where the most wealth is created at any given time in the world, which leads to the fact that this is your biggest springboard to social economical change and mobility compared to anything else by 100x. Yeah. And so it's not just that people dream that this is great or they saw Silicon Valley too much or something. It's because in reality, if you're willing to take the risk, if you're willing to take the leap of faith, it's probably better. And then even if you're not going to be successful as an entrepreneur, then taking a job in this ecosystem is so much better. I mean, I don't need to tell you, but if you're a salesperson in Verizon versus a salesperson in a startup, you don't make the same money. Yeah, the work environment is not the same. Your chances of getting big hits are not the same. If you're a customer support person, again, startup versus a bank, you're going to make more money in the startup. It's going to be more interesting. It's going to be more fun. You could get promoted more. So on every perspective, these companies are presenting today a much, much better option for young kids. And that's why I think this is not just media painting it too pink. I think this is actually the reality.
Let's talk a little bit about NFX. You're a managing partner there. It's one of the most well-known VC firms in the world, which is, I always love it when is.
Which is super cool because the fund is not even 5 years old.
Yeah. And, we always take a little bit of ownership, not that I have anything to do with NFX, but because it's from Israel, you just feel a little bit of that pride. That's always awesome. And you guys have invested, if I'm not mistaken, from what I read, over 200 companies. So
I think that includes our private investments. I don't think that we've invested. I know I don't need to think, but yeah. NFX is around 100 companies.
100. Okay. So is that you personally over 200 or?
Personally together with the other founding partners of the fund. Yes.
Okay. So I guess two questions. One is if you could list a few of the investments, probably the more well-known ones. And two, I'd love to know what was your first investment?
In my life. Wow. Yeah, I'll do that. So I think that, we have, the fund is young, so we don't have companies that have been around for 10 years and you can know them already. But if I want to throw a few names, then, we've invested in a company called Outdoorsy, which is already a unicorn around, it's a marketplace for RVs. Okay. Yeah. We've invested.
That's blowing up right now, RVs.
Yeah, RVs is cool. We're invested in a company called Mammoth Bioscience, which is Jennifer Doudna's, the Nobel Prize winner CRISPR company. That is again, not that being a unicorn is the main thing, but just as an indication, that's another unicorn. We invested in a company on a totally different place called Papaya Gaming, which is a gaming company that is a multi-billion-dollar company right now. We've invested in a company called Firefly, which is this network of outdoor advertising on cars, mostly on Lyft and Ubers. That's doing super, super well. I mean, they had a tough time through COVID, but it's doing super well right now. And, around kind of the unicorn status. We've invested in probably the fastest growing insurance agents aggregator and marketplace called Renegade Insurance, which is, again, doing super well. So a bunch of companies that are doing super, super well. So, the fund so far, we've been super lucky in investing in amazing founders that have done amazing work. Me personally, I was super lucky in meeting and investing in some of Israel's finest over the years. So, I think that I started investing probably in, 2004 or 5, which was basically when, it was after the bubble burst. And where basically good teams that were doing things on the internet we're just killing it. So, everything from areas like e-commerce with a company like JamesAllen.com, which is the largest online jeweler that ended up getting sold for a few hundred millions. Other and things like Playtika, of course, that I was one of the founders, or Moon Active, which is probably the most successful game company out of Israel right now. Yeah. Or Clarion, which is another game company. All of these on the B2C side. And companies like Globally and Similar Web that went public last year on the B2B side and many more. I mean, I was very, very fortunate in this. My first investment, though, was a company that was doing stitching of live video streams with using some fairly sophisticated machine vision technology many, many years ago. It was already 15 or 16 years ago. And it was a guy from my squadron that came to me with the idea, and I loved it, and I gave him some money, and I got a check of 10x my money after one. I said, well, I love that. And that's how I started investing. And then the second company was a company that at the time was called Canshu. Today it's called Sky. And Canshu was trying, and right now very successful, was trying to become the #1 platform for managing your PPC on the various search engines that you had then. We don't really have that many various search engines right now. Yeah. But at the time, it is that there's going to be more than one successful. And the company's now, more than $100 million sales, super profitable, still growing very fast. And that's like a 16-year-old company or something, which is crazy that it's been running for so long. But these were the first ones. And basically at the time, what I did is that whenever I had a successful outcome, I would just take the entirety of the money and just reinvest it in other companies as an angel. And that's how I built my portfolio. And I really have to say that I was Israel has some amazing entrepreneurs, and I was super, super lucky. I think I was a pretty bad investor at the beginning, and I was then a CEO, and I think I kind of mixed up my role as a CEO and my role as an investor. Yeah. So that they would come to me for a monthly or bi-weekly meeting, and I would meet them, and I would say, so what's happening? And they would tell me and say, okay, do that. And they would look at me and say, but you're just an investor. What do you mean do that? I'm like, you do that. So I think I was pretty bad at the beginning. Luckily, they were strong enough to not just listen to what I had to say. But I was really fortunate to, over the time, meet some of Israel's finest and really also learn how to work with them, which is a very different way than I ever thought before I got the hang of it.
Mm-hmm. Every time I have an Israeli investor or entrepreneur, I have to ask the same question. And every time I get a little bit of a different answer, which I like. So I'm going to ask you, I guess, the same question. I'm going to continue the tradition. Why do you think Israel is such a successful player in the tech space?
Okay. Do we have another hour or so?
We have two.
So first of all, I want to start with a funny story. So a bunch of years ago, I was invited by the government of a country. I'm not going to say which country. And they invited me to speak to the government about tech innovation and what's making Israel unique. And I came to the meeting, and we've had like the initial reception. And then we got into the meeting, and then they closed the door. And I think the Minister of Finance told me, okay, so now that you're here, tell us the secret. And I thought that he was referring to generally tell us. And I said, okay, I'll start the lecture. He said, no. What's the secret? And I said, what do you mean? There's like no single secret. He said, there's got to be something that you guys are doing differently. And I thought about it. I said, look, man, there's really, there's no one thing. And if we had one, do you think I'd tell you?
Yeah.
But if we look at it seriously, I think that I've thought about it many, for many years now. And I have this thesis that I'm a big believer in that I can share. And the thesis sits, surprise, surprise, on the concept of network effect that we like so much. And we think that at the end of the day, there could be great founders anywhere. There are great people that could be great founders anywhere. Israelis are, they're good, but they're not in any way dramatically different than entrepreneurs elsewhere. I'll talk about that in a second. The question then becomes, what makes an entrepreneur succeed in one place and fail in another place? And my theory is that this is all about density and network effect. I'll explain what I mean. So let's think for a second about the different nodes in the network that exist in Silicon Valley, which is the number one network. So in Silicon Valley, you have investors. You have more investors than anywhere else. Mm-hmm. You have accounting firms that understand startups more than anywhere else. You have lawyers that understand startup terms more than anywhere else. You have accelerators more than anywhere else. You have universities and schools that teach coding and everything more than anything else. You've got the people. So people that want to be entrepreneurs all come there, which means that your chance of finding a CTO or something there is much more. But you also have the headquarters of the large tech companies, which meaning that you're going to find more people that know things around specific industries. You're going to have more co-working spaces. You're going to have more programs. You're going to have more everything, or you're going to have more tech media. The outcome of this is that the same person with the same idea, if you take them and you parachute them in Silicon Valley and you parachute them in Prague, mm-hmm. the chances of the person in Silicon Valley with the same qualification, the same idea, and the same network, but the chances of the person in Silicon Valley are probably, 10 to 20x more. Why? Because that person now needs to find a CTO. Okay, in Prague, there are, 1,000 relevant CTOs that he needs to somehow find. In Silicon Valley, there's probably 50,000. That person needs to find a lawyer that will not ruin the company with the wrong documents. Since Prague, there's probably just a few that know that. Silicon Valley, everybody does. That person will now need to maybe consult with somebody from Google. Why? Because he's in the field. So, in Silicon Valley, he can end up meeting one of few hundred people that know a specific field in Google, and they can help him and give him advice. In Prague, he's probably not going to meet anybody. Mm-hmm. And so the more you look at it, all these things together, they end up not with the point that the people in Prague are not as smart as the people in Silicon Valley, but it's just that the ecosystem, the strength of the network, the density is such that Silicon Valley gives you a much higher chance of success than Prague. Now, of course, the second outcome of this is that the top founders from Prague, where do they go? They go to Silicon Valley. So that also is on the people. Now, when you look at Israel, Israel is very, very similar to Silicon Valley with some interesting changes. So The first thing is that we don't have headquarters of the world's largest companies, right? We don't have Google, we don't have Facebook. However, two things. The first thing is that we have the headquarters of quite a few Israeli companies that are great. So, Checkpoint and Paytika and Amdocs and others, all of them are headquarters of companies that at the quantity that does not exist in tech in almost anywhere else around the world. So that's one thing. But we also have another unique node that nobody else has, which are the foreign development centers. So of the top 300 companies in the world, tech companies in the world, there are more than 210, I think, development centers in Israel. Wow. And if you take the top 50, all of them have development centers in Israel. The meaning is that clearly it's not as good maybe as having the headquarters, but you're getting people that are being trained by these companies and they're learning a specific field and they're learning how these companies work and they get the network and everything, and then they leave and they start startups. So that's a unique node. We have another unique node, which is the military. And I thought for many years that the military was just so unique to Israel, but then Steve Blank, Professor Blank, that I talked to him about it, told me to go and watch a movie called The Secret History of Silicon Valley. And apparently Silicon Valley also was started around the military, which I didn't know in the past. But Israel has this unique thing where every year we have around 5,000 kids that are entering. Of all the kids that go to the military, 5,000 are learning technological roles in the military. Many of them are in top units like A200, which is already very known. And these places work because they have these resources, these kids, for a limited of time. They work in a very startup model, meaning that they give them tasks, they put many teams on the same thing, they challenge them to move very fast. And so these are kids that are getting trained on the job, dealing with missions that are probably much bigger than any other company would let them, because the military is only getting them for a few years from 18, so they have to let them work on these things. And then they go out and start companies. So we have this unique node. Israel, in that regard, by the way, is also very unique in that the military doesn't really limit what you have in your mind. So if you work in DARPA, like in the United States, what I understand is that you basically sign off everything that you thought while working in DARPA, including any poetry or anything else that you ever thought about in toilets, just because the way it works, that you sign everything off to the country. What Israel decided, what Israel decided is that the IP that's in your brain, as long as you don't use it for military things, you can go out and start whatever company you want. And so we have a bunch of people that went out in the military, worked in areas of cyber, worked in there, and basically they took all the experience and knowledge that they had and created civilian top companies out there. And the country's getting nothing out of it. So nobody's saying, hey, that's close to what you worked on in the military, give us royalties. But instead, we're getting the jobs, we're getting the companies, we're getting the taxes, we're getting everything. So it's factoring speed versus maybe optimizing for royalties. So that's another. So we had one unique node, which is the development centers, another one, which is the military. And a third one, I'm not a big fan of governments, but I think that the government in Israel over the years played a big role also by creating innovation programs. We have the Innovation Authority that's basically funding R&D in areas where there's a gap in the private market. We have, over the years, the government helped set up the first VCs of Israel by giving them kind of downside protection. There's been a bunch of things that the government did around that, including giving tax breaks to international companies to open their centers in Israel. So the combination of these nodes, together with the fact that we do have more investors per capita, more money per capita, more accelerators per capita, more lawyers, and all of these things, just like Silicon Valley, is creating a similar network effect, up to the point that I think that today, in some areas, for example, cyber, for example, DevOps, some deep tech areas, the same founder, if I drop them in Silicon Valley and in Israel, there's probably a higher chance of success in Israel than Silicon Valley, which is unbelievable. So I think I can say 100% that the same person with the same idea in cyber, you drop them in Israel, they're going to be more successful than if you drop them in the United States, which is mind-blowing, right? We're a tiny country of 9.5 million people. And so this theory of network effect is something that I truly believe in. And this is why I think the ecosystem in Israel is not only strong, but it's actually going to only become stronger and stronger because these network effects just keep on getting more and more higher and higher density.
Yeah. I mean, as the way I see it is obviously there is a barrier a little bit for Israel because the market is always the US, right? Sometimes Europe, but always the US. Like if you want to make it big.
It's not a barrier. It's an advantage. I'll tell you why.
But we don't know, like as Israelis, like you don't know the market necessarily in the US. Where someone that was born here.
It doesn't matter, Roy. I think it's the other way around. So
okay,
I'll explain why. Because Israel, at the end of the day, if you start a company in Germany, okay, the German economy is large enough for you to potentially think that what you want to do is sell in Germany.
Sure.
Because you can sell a few millions in Germany. There's never an Israeli top startup that starts by saying, let's sell in Israel.
Yeah.
It's always geared to the United States. We already have people that run go-to-market in the United States as much as Americans. We have in some areas a huge network of people that already sold, worked, reached out, marketed to. And so I think that, it's a huge advantage compared to any other region that may have the temptation to work locally initially, which is slowing you down. And at the same time, while it is some disadvantages compared to maybe somebody native to the United States, I think this was closed over the years. And right now in some fields, it's almost non-existent.
Okay. I mean, and I guess the other thing I could add is there's a culture in Israel where, the word kombina, it's a little bit of a harder...
Hustling.
There is a hustle culture in Israel. There is like, oh, wait, I can't do that. Why can't I do that? Let me figure out a way. I'm going to find out a way. I'm going to figure out a way to get around this. And that's just embedded into the fabric of society in Israel.
I think that you got it completely right. And the next thing I would have said, I think, and I remember it, is to talk about Israeli culture. And I think that Israeli culture by design has something that you only find almost in Silicon Valley, which is this real willingness to accept failure, embrace it, and rise and try again. And so, at the core of every innovation, there is the principle that says that the more you innovate, the more risk you take, the more likely you are to fail. That's just the reality of it. It's like, if you do something that's not risky, you will not fail, but it will not be big. If you do something huge, then, it may succeed and become huge, but it's also more likely to fail because big things fail. And so in order to be able to create these huge tech companies, you need to be willing to take these moonshots, to aim high and fail. But if you live in a society that does not accept failure, then you can't do that. I remember visiting Japan like a few years ago, and kind of looking at the numbers, and the numbers were ridiculous at the time. Israel was having, now it's a bit different, but Israel at the time had 1,200 new funded startups a year, 1,200, okay? While Japan, which is, 10 times larger than Israel or a bit more than that, while Japan had less than 150. Wow. And so I was trying to understand the reason. And the reason is, and after asking many people, I got the same answer, is that in a society where, you don't, if you fail today, you don't need to kill yourself, thank God, but you still are bringing disgrace to your family.
Yeah, shame.
So if you're starting a company and the company shuts down, if you end up, not returning money to your investors, if you end up not succeeding, then it's not just you that's looked at badly, it's your entire family.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it, in an environment like that, who would want to actually be an entrepreneur where we know that the chances are not huge to succeed? And so we see people there following the trend of, I'll go to university, I'll find a job at a good company, and I'll promote. And the entire ecosystem is completely geared to this. There's also even like kind of amazing research that showed that many of the entrepreneurs that did become entrepreneurs are people that either grew up outside of Japan, so Japanese that grew up outside of Japan, or people that didn't have family. And so there was not that many people to disappoint. And so this is kind of mind-blowing because in a way, you start understanding that the country culture is critical in people's ability to take these risks and to aim high, because if you don't, you're not going to succeed. The second thing I'll say on that is that there's another test that I sort of adopted over the years, and I call it the mother test. And the mother test is that when I come to a new country and I meet somebody who's a parent to a teenager or to a young adult, I would ask them, what would you like your kids to be? And if you ask the mother or the parents in Japan, the answer would always be, I want them to become an executive on a fast track model in one of the large companies. Mm-hmm. And if you ask today anybody in Israel, many of the parents are going to say, I want them to become an entrepreneur. Why? Because it's widely available, it's widely acceptable that this is the best way for social mobility. And so if I think that my kid is good, that's what I want them to do. And the more you are in tech centers, the more the answer is entrepreneurs. And the farther you are from tech centers, the farther you are from places that accept and embrace failure, the more you'll get other answers. And that has been a good predictor for me of what to expect in every country.
Yeah. I went to Japan like 2 years ago. They are a complete diametrically opposed culture to what Israel is. It's like it's almost like going to Mars or something. But I loved it. It was absolutely amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
There's so many things I still want to ask you, so I'm going to try to get a few more. So as you said earlier, you have a lot of people emailing you, requesting money, trying to get investment. What do you look for? What separates someone who's investable versus someone that's not investable? Because at the end of the day, and I would love to get your take on this. Like, you are in the tech business, but you're just as much in the people business, right?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that you've described it really precisely, and what people sometimes miss is that the stage of investment of the investor determines a lot more than what people think what the investor should be good at. And so when I invest in seed, most of these companies have no numbers. Mm-hmm. They have hardly any team. They may have an initial product, but not a lot more than that. And there's definitely no proof points that you would find in a later stage company. When you invest in a C round, you could almost say the CEO is important, the team is important, but they're all replaceable. There's a machine here. Yeah. There's 250 people. There's $25 million revenues. It's growing year on year. There's a clear machine here. If you pour marketing dollars here and and the SDRs take the leads and convert them, then we can basically put some other factors and we say, well, maybe the SDRs will not convert every 4 leads to a call, but maybe it's going to be every 3.5. And so the data becomes so much more important than the people. Now, I personally think that the people are still critical even then, but when you due diligence something, somebody could be an amazing person and still at the C round, their numbers are not good. And so they're not investable. When we invest at pre-seed and seed, the vast majority of what we do is that we basically audit the people, basically look at the people. And so, when people ask me for percentages, what I say is that it's probably at seed, it's probably 70% people, 20% field, and 10% idea. But I'll explain for a second what it means. So the 70% people is clear. Mm-hmm. The 20% idea is basically there are some areas where, the 20% field, there are fields that we don't want to invest in. And so it's more binary than actually, I'm going to rank this higher than that. But every once in a while, we do have themes. There are themes that we like. Like, I'll give an example. This is now probably it's only the last few months that we started diving down more seriously into clean tech, into climate. Why? Because we think that there's now, for the first time ever, structural changes that are going to make this good seed investments. And so right now, before that, climate might have been a field that I would have said, probably not. And now it's a field that I say, okay, interesting. And so that's field. And then the idea is only 10% because at the end of the day, doesn't matter how you look at it, but most of my companies didn't end up with the same idea they started with. And so I don't sit and I say, this idea has got to be perfect right now. Having said that, just to be clear, if a team comes with a really stupid idea, it really impacts the 70% of the team rather than, if the idea is like, if they don't know competition, if they come up with something that already exists in 10 companies, or if they come up with something that is just ridiculously stupid, then it indicates that they're not great. So that's that. We basically look at the people. And when we look at the people, there's tons of things I can say about it. And there's a lot of contradictions in founders, and there's more than one model that succeeds. But I think that basically we want amazing people and, like real stars, and we can talk about
what is amazing people?
What is amazing people? Amazing people are people that, these are the people that are 100% trustworthy, 100% what you see is what you get. These are the people that have fire in their eyes. They're super passionate. They love what you're doing. They care. They care about their team. They care about their company. They care about things in general. So caring is a word that we like we like a lot, and we say quite a bit. Mm-hmm. We're looking for people that basically have a real, almost obsession to their field. So like, when somebody comes to us and says, I want to build a company here in this field, because I think that I can build a large, successful company here. It still could work, right? Especially if the product is a very generic area. Like I want to create a payment network because I think that a payment network is good. That's fine. But in most cases, when the person comes with a personal story, with a personal urge, with a passion about a field that comes from something, I think the best example I have is, a company called MyHeritage that I invested in, which has this phenomenal founder called Gilad, who is probably the best person in the world to run a company like that, because more than anything else, and he's a great executive as well, but more than anything else, he has a true passion for genealogy. He truly, truly, truly loves that. He has old coin collection. He loves history. He loves understanding dynasty. He loves understanding how things connect. He loves the algorithms of being able to connect two family trees and make them into one. He would love to map the entirety of the world into one big tree and know exactly how everybody's connected to everybody. He just loves that. Now, I like it. He loves it. So he has this passion to it. And then the last thing is that we found that people that have a chip on their shoulder usually are better founders than those that don't. Now, this is a generalization, and there's exceptions to everything. But generally speaking, somebody that failed in the previous company, or somebody that needs to prove that they're better than somebody else, or somebody that has a personal story which gets them to want to show everybody they're successful, or somebody that has just a huge internal urge to prove something. These people usually end up being better at overcoming the toughest points of entrepreneurship that every company has. And so these are the kind of people, again, we're not investing only in these kind of people, but that goes into the ranking as well as we look at teams. Now, of course, we don't invest in an individual. Sometimes there would be single founders, but in the vast majority, it would be 2 to 4 founders. And there's all these statistics about what works better, single versus. But we do believe that while there are some single founders that have built amazing companies, and we do have some single founders in our portfolio, I think that we do believe that, because we've done it so many times, that entrepreneurship is such a tough journey that, for the founders, but also for the success of the company, we really believe that having at least one partner that you can share the burden with is super, super critical. It is important to say that in many cases, what we think about the founder CEO is like probably the most important single factor in the investment decision, because as time passes, it's the founder CEO that takes upon him or her more of the responsibility and more of the external facade of the company and the ability to fundraise and so on. But we are looking at the entirety of the team.
Network effects is super interesting. Obviously, you guys, NFX, that is network effects. So that is your moniker in a way. But can we talk about Clubhouse for a second? Because they had crazy network effects, right? They grew like crazy. They created FOMO in the beginning, which like you could only get onto the app through invite, right? It was a kind of exclusive club. And I remember myself, I was like, everyone on Twitter is talking about this Clubhouse. How do I get on it? And I couldn't get an invite. Eventually, I got an invite. I thought it was the greatest idea ever, right? You had Elon Musk, all these people were talking. It was amazing. And then they just disappeared. Like no one is using Clubhouse. And obviously the competition offered, Twitter has the Spaces. I think Spotify had Green Room. Facebook had something. All of them came with competition, and Clubhouse was almost overnight. So how does an app with crazy network effects go from the hottest thing in town to oblivion in a very short amount of time? And not to shit on them, like this has nothing to do with them. It's just an interesting case study that I think about.
Well, first of all, this has everything to do with them.
But I don't want to shit on the team. I don't want to shit on the company.
No.
Just interesting.
I didn't mean that, but I can also speak from personal experience because I was the first investor in this small app called House Party.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right, which House Party had. It started as an app called Yevo. It then turned into an app called Air, Life on the Air. Then it turned into an app called Meerkat that exploded overnight and then was cut off the Twitter API, the Twitter feed. And a graph, and basically died in a second. And then it became House Party that grew crazily and then died, and then was sold for peanuts to Epic. and then through COVID exploded again, and then only to be killed by Epic later on. So, so I do know this experience, and I can speak to it personally. I think that there's a bunch of things to understand. The first thing is that the nature of good network effects businesses is that they grow super fast. Mm-hmm. And they grow super fast because at the end of the day, what's happening is that when you're getting to a point that the product you've got crazy product market fit, but the product by design is a network effect product, meaning that it's not something that is bolted on top of it. The design of the product is the network, like WhatsApp, the design of the product is the network. Facebook, the design of the product is the network. eBay, the design of the product is the network. And so the network effect, when it's really inherently part of the product, and then you have product market fit, growth becomes crazy. Now, in the launch, House Party did basically all the good things that you should do in a great Silicon Valley company. So, if I need to mention just a few, is that the first thing is that they created scarcity, right? Now, how did they create scarcity? Through a limited availability campaign. Yeah. But then through that scarcity, they also created virality because they gave each one of us a few invites. And so as it was scarce, the fact that I got invites made me important. And so I basically gave these invites. And so for free, I ended up marketing the app for them because I felt that I was bringing value for others. So that is one thing they did super well. And, this has been done in the past, but Clubhouse was probably one of the best demonstrations of that. They also used what was then called the inner circle hack. The inner circle hack is when you find the inner circle of your core product, and you basically make sure that the inner circle is motivated to be there because of status and because they're your friends. And so in a way, Clubhouse could not have been started by a young 18-year-old because they didn't have the network to invite all these people. And Clubhouse was started by an older team that experienced and are very networked in Silicon Valley. And in a way, the initial hack that Clubhouse had was very similar to the initial hack of LinkedIn, where Reed basically just, was so networked and so loved and such a great product person that he just invited all these people. And so LinkedIn started from the core people that any app would dream to have after 5 years. Yeah. But these were the first people on LinkedIn. And same thing for Clubhouse. All the people that theoretically should have been the people that would only arrive when the Clubhouse has 500 million users, they were the first people in because they used the celebrity inner network hack that they could use. Now, I mean, sadly, not every startup can use that because not everybody can bring these people. Yeah. Not everyone has Mark Andreessen invested in them. Exactly. Yeah. And what happened then is that through that they grew and grew and grew and grew, and then the burden was on them to create enough value so that people would actually end up staying there, and that staying there would actually turn this into one of their favorite things to do. And here I think that there are essentially three elements that made it tougher, in my view. And clearly, there are people that are smarter than me that would have a better analysis, but here are the three. The first thing is that I think that this is a service that consumes a lot of time. Yeah. Meaning that a live service by design is very, it's great because it provides this kind of peeping Tom thing where like a live show, like a live TV show, right? Why is linear TV still alive? Because of live TV shows. Why are live TV shows alive? Because there's stupid things that are being said there that can't be edited because they're live. Yeah. And so clearly the live thing is great, but the live thing requires a lot of time. And so when it was at the beginning, it was Elon Musk speaking, and Elon Musk is such a big celeb, then everybody came and listened to Elon, and that's fine. But when now there's 100 people speaking, 2,000 people speaking, 5,000 people speaking, then basically I'm losing that advantage, and I now need to spend a few hours on this app, which is super, super tough to ask people. And if I don't spend a few hours, then I'm probably missing out on the cool thing that's happening there. So that's one thing. And this is why essentially radio was also always limited compared to a Facebook, simply because at the end of the day, you can only listen to one channel at a time. And that one channel is basically a relatively slow format. So, it's an hour show or an hour and a half show. And that just takes time. Most people don't have that time. So that's one thing. The second thing is that this requires amazing curation, meaning that for this to work, you probably want, just like you see in like the way podcasts are curated on Spotify and other places, you probably want less shows, but really good ones, rather than many shows that are junk.
Yeah.
And what I think happened over time is that as the platform grew and as this democratic view of everybody can basically broadcast, ended up with a lot of sub-quality content out there. And as people were starting to listen to this sub-quality, all you need is one or two bad experiences to say, I just spent 30 minutes or something. 30 minutes in my life is huge. Mm-hmm. And so then the third thing is that what people are looking for today are super, super small sound bites to consume things, right? You know, think about your usage of social. I mean, my average usage of social or sessions, I just looked it up, our sessions are 30 seconds or you know, less than a minute. Why? Because I've got a minute, I'm looking, update, next. And this just doesn't work in live. You know, you need to have your time for that. So that limits us as well. And then I think the last thing, which is not, I think on the other thing, they could have maybe done a better job. But then the last thing where there's probably nothing they could have done is that we live in this unique era where copying is no longer something that people don't do. Yeah. And so when I started in tech, I remember looking and, you know, one of my competitors' product and seeing a feature and saying, God damn, you know, these guys, they nailed the feature that we should have had. But like, am I going to copy it now? That's so embarrassing. Like, people don't do that, right? But then in an era where Facebook can see stories working and simply in one day replicate it across Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and everywhere, just because that's what users want, and we're here to serve the users. Yeah. And so in an age of almost like, I'll call it no creative shame, it's okay to copy because everybody copies because that's the case. If you don't end up nailing and cementing your product so well that by the time it's out, there's really no chance that somebody overtakes you, then what happens is that everybody looks at it and says, okay, that seems to be working well. Hey, Twitter, let's add this. Hey, Facebook, let's add this. Hey, Spotify, let's add this. And then you're kind of stuck with the product that is good, but then people are already on other social graphs. They're already in other apps. They're already spending their time there. They're already coming there because basically they're consuming their short form there. They're consuming their few minutes of social there. They're consuming their music there. And then if I want live, I'm just going to do a bit more over there, and that's fine. Yeah. Now, does it mean that Clubhouse is not going to be around? I don't think so. I think that, you know, Clubhouse is the first one, and as one that has great investors and one that has great people that are still broadcasting, that's probably going to stay around. But the chance of this to become the number one social repository, as people thought at some point, that's probably behind us.
Yeah, we all thought like everyone, oh, podcasts are dead. This, like all these, you know, all these things, all these ideas and all these thoughts and all these things came out when Clubhouse was going live. And I was like, oh, is podcasting going to die? Are these things going to happen? Is this a shift that we're seeing? And then you see a few months later, no, it's actually none of that. It could have happened. But
that's the beauty of our industry, right? It's like you try, you get to go with something, you touch the sky. If you don't grow wings by then you end up landing again and trying again. That's the beauty of our industry.
No, what they did was, I think every entrepreneur would love to have the type of launch that they did. It's almost unheard of, you know. The
type of launch, I completely agree.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit more high-level philosophical, if you will, about tech in general. The way I see it, I feel like there is a love of tech, but there's also a fear of tech. In the sense of there's privacy, there's manipulation of facts, there's addiction, there's mis and disinformation. There's a love for founders who create amazing things, right? Like we all love the underdog story, came from nothing, hustled his way to the top, made it, got the investment, exited with $1 billion. But then once they get that exit or once they become really big, like a Zuckerberg, like a Bill Gates, like the people with Uber, etc., then they're not so loved anymore. And I'm just interested to get maybe your take on kind of that dichotomy. How do you view it?
Look, I think that there's many layers to this question. I think that, first of all, generally speaking, there is love for tech as tech, period. I think that there is no way to look at it, but our average lifespan right now is 83 in the United States. That's tech, right? 100 years ago, which was, 40 something.
Yeah.
Every person in the United States now has almost internet, and access to every piece of data, true or false, all around the world. That is tech. We all hold personal computers in our hands that are stronger than what was taken to land on the moon. That is tech. All these, I can transfer money to my friend in Latin America in 3 seconds, without thinking about it. That is tech. All these things are clearly making life more comfortable. And so I think that generally speaking, there is love and appreciation for tech. That's one thing. The second thing is that there are some parts of tech that are not just 100%, they're not 100% clean in the way people think about them, either because they have negative implications or because the way they're implemented have negative implications. So if we think about something that have negative implications, then if we look at, games, then games can also create game addiction. Or games can get kids to maybe spend too much time on games instead of studying. So that's not necessarily good, or maybe not necessarily bad, but some people definitely think it's bad. And so while we can look at it and say, or many people can look at it and say it's great, other people look at it and say that's a negative. So and that's normal, that's fine. But there also are places where the implementation of the tech is problematic. And clearly, if you look at, cyber attacks, that's one example, and that's extreme. But even if you think about a company like an Uber, then you'd get drivers being really, really upset because they feel that they get paid the minimum ever, so that they'll continue driving, but that the company is worth billions and they're making very little money. And passengers are upset because the minute that there is a bit of rain, there's surge pricing, and they feel that they're paying a lot more than they should pay, and it's only because the company can do that. And so this is, again, the tech they love. Nobody would want Uber or Lyft to go away, but people don't like the way it's implemented. People would love Uber to be probably a smaller company with less profit and make the drivers happier and the customers happier. In that regard, by the way, one of the promises is Web3, and we can go back to that in a second because that changes the model, but I'm parking that for a second. And then there's the third layer, which is tech entrepreneurs. So we've had core technology, and I think that we all agree that core technology is, generally speaking, positive. We have the way it's implemented, and then we agree that in some cases, some of the tech is implemented not only for the benefit of humankind, and also some of the business models around tech have been implemented in a nasty manner. Like, you could develop a drug, but then if you charge too much money for the drug, then that's kind of nasty. So that's the business implementation. And then when we talk about tech entrepreneurs, I think the tech entrepreneurs, it's a more complex thing, because once people become super, super strong and super, super known, and they become like these huge celebs, then people start looking at them differently. And so some of them may become heroes. But when you have heroes, you also need villains. I personally think that, without naming anybody, and I know most of them, I think that those that are crowned as heroes are not necessarily heroes. And I definitely think that those that are crowned as villains are not that big a villain. Yeah. And I think that is just, the public needs to make these characters that are bigger than life. We don't know them. We don't know how they behave at home. We don't know how they behave with their kids. We don't know whether they're good people at the level of their everyday. And so we end up collecting some sound bites, and then there's this trend of sentiment toward that person, and the same person could be a hero one day, and then after a few years, they can become the temporary villains. And so I think that in that regard, it is, I'm putting aside for a second the question of the celebrities, because I think that I personally, I don't think that is that much of a big question for humanity. If people love Elon Musk or not, or if people love Zuckerberg or not, that's a personal thing of them, and they can work on their image if they want to. I do think that it is important that we don't get to the point that people think of tech as evil. Yeah. Now, we have seen, I think, in the last in the last 5 years, in the big fights that we've seen all across the West, we have seen that some people are starting to look at tech advancement and saying the tech inventions by design are aimed to undermine our way of living. And I think that it is super critical that two things. The first thing is that we actually listen to this and we try to understand why people feel that, because it doesn't matter that I think that they are wrong, but at the end of the day, if that's what they feel, that's real. And I think that for the sake of humanity, we must make sure that the tech locomotive is basically pulling everybody forward and not leaving people behind. And I think that when we think about what happened, and I mean, this is now becoming a pretty grim conversation, but when we think about what happened, in the United States and in the UK, with Brexit and in Israel in some form, I think that what we're seeing is that there are lots of people that feel that that train that is rushing forward does not stop for them. And so when they feel that, then despite the fact that even being close to that train help them with longevity, help them with health, help them with a bunch of things, they're starting to be negative on tech as a whole. And if humanity will become negative on tech as a whole and on science as a whole, that's where we're starting to slow down human progress, which is something that scares me quite a bit. And so is it a real issue? I think it is, not necessarily because I believe the underlying claims around it, but because I think the sentiments are more important than the actual claims. And as while there are millions that feel that that's the case, if we as the tech leaders, if you wish, don't really think about it, understand it, and try to fix it, then the outcome is going to be negative for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think people love tech. Obviously, everyone uses it. We all have our phones and we're connected to it. I think people just on the day-to-day don't like some of the things, like if I say cat food and all of a sudden, like I'm starting to get ads for cat food on Instagram, on everywhere. You're like, okay, the phone is obviously listening to me. It's obviously picking up on everything I'm saying. And then ads are kind of harmless, but then it's like, okay, what other nefarious things are happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of? And then obviously the social media aspect, the echo chambers, where like if I'm looking at something, if it's right wing or left wing, it's going to keep promoting that same thing because that's what I'm attracted to. That's what gets me up in arms, right? Like if I'm seeing stuff about the right wing or if I'm seeing something about the left wing, it's just going to keep putting me in that same cycle. So I will keep scrolling and just stay on longer.
So look, I think that you're mostly talking right now about two topics. One of them is the impact of social networks on human opinions and on human behavior, and the other one is ads. I think that ads are actually much simpler. Ads are simpler because at the end of the day, governments and regulators can define what data can be collected on us. I personally, and I do understand privacy, but I personally think that the vast majority of people that want ads to stop being, they want to be stop tracked for ads, they just never got the wrong ad feed yet. And when they will get it, they may want to change their mind. It's clearly got to be that it's statistical. It's clearly got to be that nobody can look at my personal preferences for any other use. Mm-hmm. It's clearly got to be that I can say I don't want to be tracked. It's clearly got to be that I can say I don't want to get targeted ads. Give me whatever other ads, general. All of that is clear, but I personally don't necessarily feel that that is one of the world's biggest issues. That is me. I just don't feel that that's one of the world's biggest issues. And I feel that regulators are, clearly regulators are slower than the progress of tech companies. That's just by design. But I don't feel that regulators are that far behind on that. You look at GDPR, you look at cookies change, you look at all these things. We are in a much better place than we were before. So maybe some would say even maybe too far. That's fine. I'm putting this aside. I think that social networks basically are a big issue because unlike ads that have a very clear guiding hand that you can understand and you can say, Google wants to sell more ads, and so they're collecting more data. And so we need to limit how much data they're collecting because they have an interest to make more money, and we want to balance privacy with money. And that is when everybody knows what they want, it's very easy. Like they want to collect data, they want to give us a more targeted ad that's going to get us to click. We want to keep some privacy, but we also want some targeted ads. We don't want them to be super stupid. We need to find a balance. in social networks, basically, the interesting thing is that what we're amplifying is human behavior that existed before, but that was never amplified in such a manner. And so when you think about it, we always had echo chambers. So, think about yourself pre-election. You meet your friends. The vast majority of your friends have similar opinions. Why? Because that's the nature of humanity. The people that are around you from the same circles, they have similar opinions. You then sit there and you start saying the other side, they're nasty, they're stupid, they're wrong. And you go on and on and on and on. And you go out from this meeting a lot more energized about your opinion. Because a lot of other smart people have the same opinion, right? Because you basically just heard them and they heard you. And so think about a political rally. People go out of the political rally, which are all these people that are the same, and they go out with lots of energy and lots of desire. But this happens to us, once a week, once a month, once every 2 days. And the people that impact us are the people that are around us. So it's kind of limited in the people. And then after, hearing my friends say the same thing 10 times, it's kind of boring. So I'm not going to do this 10 times in a row. And so the impact of this natural tendency to only want to hear my opinion again and again and again, and then to take the opinion that is reread to me and use it to enhance my own opinion, that cycle, that basic mental process is happening, but to a certain level. And then comes social networks that are available all the time with algorithms that come from the best engineers in the world, that they don't care about enhancing. They care about making me happy, about giving me dopamine in my brain for reading the next thing, because I need to stay for the next one and the next one and the next one. And so what this basically does, it takes my once a week meeting with my friend and it turns it into every 2 minutes or every 5 minutes, or every hour, and not just with my friends, also with other people that the algorithm identifies is right. And then basically putting it in the right order. And then all of that essentially is suddenly getting people to get much more accelerated on their opinions, right? So, we've had some acceleration in the rallies, we've had some acceleration in the physical meetings, but now we have that in a crazy manner online. Now, could you blame somebody that built this of intending to build this? I'm pretty involved with Facebook. I have to tell you that I have 100% certainty that nobody sat there and said, let's get people political crazy. Yeah. We're going to make more money if people are going to be more extreme on their opinions, right? This is like the largest social experiment in history. Well, it's social and kind of also mental, psychological experiment in history, with no test group almost, and with nobody really doing the research. And so the outcome there is much larger than the problem of the ads. And I think that it's also much tougher to interfere with it, because whose interests are we trying to defend here, and what interests are we trying to break? I mean, are we going to tell Facebook, you've got to reduce your algorithm from being 9 out of 10 at taking my attention to 7 out of 10? Are we going to tell Facebook, you know what? You need to put in my feed, half the content needs to be content I don't want to see.
Yeah.
But if it's content I don't want to see, I'm not going to be happy with the app. And then somebody else is going to create the app and put the content that I do want to see, right? That's just the way it works. And so I think this is a much more complex problem. I think that Facebook probably didn't handle that well from any perspective, like PR perspective and internal perspective. I think that this is now becoming clear. It's becoming much clearer that this is a big issue for humanity in general. And so I think that companies should start thinking openly about how they self-regulate this, because if not, it's going to be regulators that are going to regulate it. And I'm not sure that anybody's going to be happy with that.
Yeah. No, we could talk about this for another hour, but we don't have time for that today. And that's not why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because this is a very, very loaded topic. But you mentioned Web3 earlier. So before I let you go, I think a lot of people are hearing Web3. I don't think a lot of people fully understand what Web3 is. So could you maybe explain it and explain what, I mean, you don't have to go into like full, but just like a brief overview, if you can, and then explain maybe like why you're so bullish on Web3 and its applications.
We need now another 4 hours. So Web3, or blockchain, as some people call it, or crypto, as some people call it, is essentially a general name for a bunch of things that are coupled together, and all of them are things that developed around the concept of the technology that allows to essentially manage data and interactions in a decentralized manner. This is like the very simplistic thing. And so if we think about any service that exists in the Web 2 world, an eBay, a Facebook, an Uber, there is a central entity, and that central entity is usually a company, and that company usually is building the software and collecting the data and storing the data and making decisions and providing the service. And this is basically the normal engagement of a central entity that is then working with a bunch of constituencies, customers, and sometimes it's supply and demand, sometimes it's more than that. And this is the way the world works. When blockchain came to be, the theory was that this is going to change not just whether we're going to have Bitcoin or not, but this is going to change the entire way that people interact with each other. And I'm going to get back to that in a second. In reality, what blockchain did so far, and I mean, I'm not doing a great job at explaining it, but what blockchain did so far is basically, the first thing is that it created a decentralized store of value. Mm-hmm. So a store of value is a currency, right? When I put my money in dollars, I basically trust the US government that these dollars will have value. It's a store of value. I can save money in dollars. I trust the US government, which is a central organization. And basically, this has been the basic of modern finance for years now. There are some things that are not central stores of value, like gold. So gold is traded in some places, but gold has no parent. There's no country that is the parent of gold. There is no organization which owns all the gold. Nobody's printing more gold other than nature. And so from our perspective, gold is like a little bit decentralized, but it's not really, because it's a physical thing. It's tough to take. And also, who knows what's going to be the value of gold in the future. And so blockchain was the first thing, and blockchain is a decentralized store of value. And a decentralized store of value, meaning that somebody created an algorithm. This algorithm, thank God so far, could not be hacked by anybody else. And that algorithm basically allows to store on a very wide network ownership data of these bits of something that is called a Bitcoin, which has value only because we believe it has value. And because, like other money, right now other people are willing to take it for goods or for services. And that network is very different from the network of US dollars or euros, because it doesn't have anybody that controls it. And so nobody can decide to print more Bitcoins other than the algorithm, which is open source, so everybody can see when there will be more Bitcoins printed. Nobody can decide to burn Bitcoins. Like, nobody can decide to limit the number of Bitcoins other than the algorithm, which is very transparent to all of us. And so suddenly we have a store of value that is completely separate from the sovereign country status of economy that we've had before. And that was the beginning. And, people at the beginning looked at it and said, it's nuts. Who wants it? Why do we need it? And so on and so on. But we're now at the point where there's enough people that believe in it, that it has real value. Okay. And just like I can look at the currency of Iraq and say, I don't believe in its value because I don't know if there's going to be a country there and so on. And so my trust in the currency of the sovereign country, Iraq, is very low. And when it's getting to be at a certain point, just drops and drops and drops. The same thing is with Bitcoin. As long as there is enough people that have high trust in this, and high trust in this case is because people would think that there's more people coming in. High trust is because Morgan Stanley starts selling investment products that are tied into this. High trust is because I see more and more people that are receiving payments in Bitcoin. And so that is Bitcoin, and that is basically a store of value. Okay. And that's the first thing that Web3 did. The second thing that happened is that as more and more people had their money in these kind of things like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which is a bit different, but we can go back to this, or any of the other tokens or coins that are out there, we started needing to have a finance system that helps them. So this is now more or less a $2 trillion economy, which is fairly big. It's like an apple. And all the people that have money in this, they want to get interest, and they want to be able to lend it, and they want to be able to save it, and they want to be able to get interest, and they want to be able to do whatever. And so there's this entire secondary industry around it that is called DeFi, decentralized finance, that is basically what financial services can you get to all these tokens, to all these coins. So that's the second thing. And as long as the store of value exists, you will need DeFi. And so DeFi is a real thing because this is 2 trillion. So somebody needs to give financial services to these 2 trillion. So that is also real. The third thing that came up is basically the contractual element that each one of these tokens have. And the contractual element means that basically they're not just a line that says, okay, Gigi has 1 Bitcoin. That's great, but this is not just what it says, because it can also say, Gigi has 1 Bitcoin, and if it rains, and well, rains is an external thing, but Gigi has 1 Bitcoin, and if a piece of data is sent from here to here, Gigi's Bitcoin needs to be taken from his wallet and given to Roy. And this is basically what we call a smart contract. The smart contract is something that you could usually word in a normal contract, but because this is all digital, you can actually put it in code. And so rather than having to go to a lawyer and somebody writing it down and then going to a court to decide whether you need to enforce the contract or not, all of this could be now in a contract. And when you think about what you can do with this, you can do with this a bunch of things. But the first thing that came out of it is what we call NFTs.
Yeah.
NFTs are these tokens that basically represent ownership of something. It could be a drawing, it could be a character like an ape, it could be tickets to a show. And the interesting thing is that not only can nobody steal it from you because it's not on a central server, so even if somebody hacks it, they can't take it. But more than this is that the minute that it is on a smart contract, you could do some crazy things, like, for example, say, hey, Gigi, you bought the Beyonce ticket. If you're going to ever sell it to somebody else, for the ticket to move to somebody else, somebody needs to pay Beyonce another $10. So basically what it does, it not only creates the initial ownership, but it also creates the ability to do some crazy things around ownership, some crazy things around what happened when you transfer hands, and so on and so on and so on. And so NFTs is this. I'm not sure about NFTs as art. That is for other people to say. But NFTs is a way to represent ownership that comes with a smart contract. That is something that's going to happen for sure. And I can speak for hours and hours and hours. But the most interesting thing was the concept that is still not proven, sadly, which is that the blockchain stack can actually replace the way any company in the world works. And if we take the Uber example, then in Uber, there's a central company that tries to pay the drivers as little as they can until they stop driving, and takes as much money from the consumers as they can until the consumers would stop taking rides. And in the middle, there's this company that's worth tens of billions of dollars that's trying to basically take the most out of the ecosystem. And then the thought is that you could replace all of that with the non-for-profit. The non-for-profit basically works off tokens. The tokens are the way that this marketplace works. And the company basically, which was the company, is no longer there. There's no owners that will try to take the most out of it. The drivers basically just want everything to be as streamlined as possible. The consumers want it to be as streamlined as possible. And the outcome is that theoretically, everybody could pay less, get more, and have less friction. This is something that was the big promise of Web3 early on, the utility of Web3 in actually changing business model and changing ownership. And this has not yet been proven, but I'm still a big believer that this will come with time. And I think that it's going to be great because this is actually going to reduce a lot of what I don't like about large tech, a lot about what I don't like about central companies and their crazy valuations and the money that they're making, and how we can basically make the world a bit more, equal place, a bit more of a fairer place. And I think that this is one of the promises of Web3. There's also, so that people don't think that I'm stupid, there's also a lot of things about ownership of data and a lot of things about being able to take off your data and take over your account and there's the metaverse, there's all these other things. But, as I said, we need hours for that.
Yeah. No, I think before this has mass adoption, especially with non-Gen Z population, it's going to take time because, if you explain to my dad, for example, who's older fella, money is very easy. He understands money. I have money. I give you $5. You give me fruit. Very easy to explain. When you start going about bits and coins and decentralized and NFTs and ownership and, there's all this terminology and all this like tech vocabulary that I think a lot of people, especially like I said, like the old, maybe people over, 30, myself included, that don't fully comprehend. Like they get it on a certain level, but they don't like fully comprehend it when people explain to them. So I think it's going to take some time for those things to maybe simplify themselves, just like Web 2 or Web 1, whatever, like things simplify themselves over time. And then that has the potential for mass adoption. Just my 2 cents on the matter.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, Gigi, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it. It's been
thanks so much for inviting me.
Very, very insightful. Where are the best? I know you don't spend too much time on social media and stuff, but like, where are the best places for people to follow you? And
Yeah, the NFX blog and Twitter are probably the 2 best places.
All right, cool. Thanks again for your time, man. I had a blast today.
Thanks so much.